My mother abused me all throughout my childhood and ruined my chances at college. So I got my revenge by ruining her life. Growing up, my mom, Linda, wasn't exactly what you'd call nurturing. It's tough admitting this, but she was abusive. Not just in the physical slap across the face kind of way, but in every way that could mess a kid up. I'm not here to throw a pity party, though, just want to share my side, you know? So it all started way back. As far back as I can remember, Linda had a temper that could ignite faster than gasoline. I was always walking on eggshells, trying not to set her off. But no matter how quiet or good I tried to be, it was like she had a sixth sense for finding something to get mad about. She'd yell for hours over the smallest things, like if I forgot to put a dish away or if I left a light on. And let me tell you, her screaming wasn't your ordinary shouting. It was this bone-chilling thing that made you feel about 2 inches tall. Sometimes, though, the yelling turned into hitting. I don't really like to go into details about that part, but yeah, it was as bad as you're probably guessing. Anyway, to cope with all that, I started pulling these petty little revenge stunts. Nothing harmful, but just enough to give me a sense of winning something back, you know? Like this one time I peed in her Lipton iced tea. Yeah, I know, gross, right? But when you're a kid with no control over anything, you find weird ways to push back. I also did this thing where I'd rub her forks and spoons between my butt cheeks before setting the table. Childish? Totally. Satisfying? More than I'd like to admit. And before you judge me, remember, this was a kid's version of fighting back against a pretty crappy situation. No pun intended. As I got older, the situation didn't get any better. If anything, it just got worse because I started understanding more about how wrong the whole thing was. By the time I hit middle school, I was full on resenting her and everything at home. It's like the air in our house was constantly thick with tension. You could cut it with a knife, and just sitting in the living room felt like sitting in a minefield waiting for the next explosion. She started kicking me out around then, too. Told me to find somewhere else to live. Can you imagine that? Telling a 13-year-old to get lost? The first few times, I'd just wander around the neighborhood until she cooled off. But one day, she was so fed up, she actually sent me away to another country for a whole year and tried to hold on to my passport so I couldn't come back. That year abroad was crazy. I was staying with relatives who barely knew me, in a place where I didn't speak the language. Felt like I'd been dropped on another planet. Somehow, though, it was still better than being at home. At least there was no screaming, no hitting, just a lot of confusion and loneliness, which was a step up in some sad way. Getting back to the US was a whole adventure on its own. Mom didn't want me back, obviously, but my stepdad, Jack, wasn't about to let her send me away for good. He's always been more of a dad than my real dad ever was. So he pulled some strings, got in touch with the embassy, and helped me get back home. Home, as in the place, not the feeling, because by then, I didn't really have a place that felt like home anymore. I made it back right in time for senior year, but with no credits from the year before, my school was like, "Who are you even?" I had to bust my butt to catch up, staying late, coming in early, and even then, all I managed was to scrape enough credits to get a GED instead of a diploma. It sucked, watching my friends gear up for prom and graduation while I was just trying to make it through without falling apart. But I did make one good friend, Mark. He was one of those guys who everyone likes, you know? He had his own troubles, but always had a smile and a joke ready. We'd hang out after school, mostly at his place because mine was a no-go zone. His family was cool, treated me like I was one of their own. It was weird, but nice to see what a normal family looked like. Despite everything, I was determined to make something of myself. Linda had always said I'd amount to nothing, just like my dad, who I never really knew. But something about the way she said it made me want to prove her wrong. I started applying to colleges, thinking maybe if I could get a degree, I could get out for good. Linda, of course, laughed when I told her I was applying to colleges, said I was dreaming if I thought I could make it. But when I actually got accepted into a 2-year program with a chance to transfer to a university later, she changed her tune. Suddenly, she was all promises about how I could stay as long as I was in school. Stupidly, I believed her. That turned out to be a mistake. A big one. That's the setup anyway. It's a lot, I know, but that's where my story starts. From there, it gets even crazier. Senior year was supposed to be the big finale of high school, right? Prom, graduation, those sweet moments of triumph. Well, for me, it was more about survival and finding any scrap of normalcy I could. After scrambling back from a year abroad, thanks to my stepdad Jack, who's pretty much the MVP of this story, I landed smack in the middle of what should have been my victory lap at high school. Only it felt more like starting over. I was the kid who disappeared for a year, then popped back up with a weird accent and clothes that didn't quite fit the local trends anymore. First day back, and I'm already an outsider. Kids have cliques, right? Well, they don't just let you waltz back in after a year. especially when your mom's known as the local nut job. Thanks, Linda. So I'm trying to catch up academically because I'm way behind. Teachers were giving me the side eye, wondering if I was going to stick around or if I'd vanish again. I started staying after school, hitting the books hard. It was either that or go home to Linda's latest screaming saga, so you can bet I found religion in the religion of studying. About a month in, I get this idea in my head that maybe I could join the soccer team. I figured it'd be a good way to meet some people, blow off steam, and hey, maybe even add something fancy to my college apps. Coach gave me a shot, probably felt sorry for me or something. I wasn't great, but running around the field felt like freedom. Plus, it kept me out of the house even longer, which was the real win. Things at home were, well, predictable. Linda was on her usual terror streak, finding new and creative ways to make my life hell. If it wasn't the yelling, it was the guilt trips or the cold shoulders. But this time around, I had soccer practice to drown it out. It was like as soon as I hit that field, her voice just couldn't reach me. Halfway through the semester, though, things took a nosedive. Linda decided one night to throw one of her infamous fits right in the middle of a big term project I was working on. Papers flew, my laptop nearly got smashed, typical Linda chaos. But this time I snapped a bit, told her she couldn't keep doing this. Big mistake. She kicked me out. Again. But this time it felt final. I grabbed my stuff and crashed at Mark's place. His parents were cool about it, didn't ask too many questions. Mark just clapped me on the shoulder and made up the couch. That couch became my new base camp. School was my only escape. I was pulling decent grades somehow. Teachers started noticing, giving me nods and small smiles like they were silently rooting for me. It felt good. Like maybe I wasn't just the freak show Linda had always said I was. Then, there was this one teacher, Mr. Thompson. Dude was like something out of a movie, you know? Tweed jacket, glasses, always a book in his hand. He taught English and somehow got me hooked on classic novels. Said I had a knack for writing, which blew my mind. Nobody had ever told me I was good at anything like that. Mr. Thompson started giving me extra books to read outside of class. We'd chat about them after school, sometimes during lunch. It was weird having an adult actually treat me like my thoughts mattered. He even suggested I could be a writer one day. That idea stuck with me, kind of like a little seed planted in the back of my mind. Prom came and went. I didn't go. Felt like too much of a reminder of everything I wasn't a part of. But graduation, that was non-negotiable. I was going to walk that stage, get my diploma, and prove Linda wrong. Graduation day was weirdly sunny, like the universe had decided to give me a break for once. I stood there in my gown, looking around at all the families hugging and taking pictures. Felt a bit like an outsider, but then Mark's family pulled me into a photo. "One of us," his mom joked, squeezing me tight. Walking across that stage, shaking the principal's hand, grabbing that diploma, it was surreal. Like I'd actually managed to pull something off despite everything. Mr. Thompson gave me a nod from the sidelines, and I swear, that meant more to me than any family cheer could have. Summer rolled around, and I had to figure out what was next. College was looming, but so was the reality of living on my own. No way was I going back to Linda's. I picked up a couple of jobs, landscaping by day, washing dishes by night. Saved every penny I could, slept on any couch that would have me. One night, lying on Mark's couch, staring at the ceiling, I thought about what Mr. Thompson said about writing. Maybe that was my way out. Not just out of Linda's shadow, but out of this whole mess. Maybe I could write my way into a new life. So I started scribbling down my thoughts, my stories, everything. Filled notebooks with words, most of it probably garbage, but it felt like I was building something. Like I was taking all the crap Linda had thrown at me and turning it into something of my own. That summer, I learned a lot about myself. Learned that I could survive, that I could make plans, and maybe, just maybe, I could write a future where I was in charge. No Linda, no chaos, just me and the words. And as fall edged closer, with the start of college on the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Weird, huh? After everything, still finding a spot for hope. But that's how it went down. Just a guy, a bunch of books, and a whole lot of determination to prove that I could be more than what Linda said I'd be. And who knows, maybe that's just the start of something big. Starting college was like stepping onto another planet. Not just because I was finally out of Linda's grip, but because everything was so different. I mean, here I was, a guy who barely managed to scrape through high school with a GED, walking into this big campus like I actually belonged there. The first few weeks were a blur of trying to find my classes, figuring out where the cheapest coffee was. Student budget, am I right? And just trying to blend in with a bunch of kids who seemed like they had it all figured out. Spoiler alert, they didn't, but it sure felt like it at the time. I'd landed a spot in a community college about 2 hours away from my hometown, far enough to feel like a fresh start, close enough that I could still crash on Mark's couch if things went south. The plan was to nail the first 2 semesters, then maybe transfer to a university. Big dreams considering my track record, but I was all in. Classes were a whole new ballgame. I'd picked a mix, some Gen EDS, a couple of potential majors I was toying with, but the real game changer was this intro to psychology class. The prof was this enthusiastic guy who could make even the driest topics seem like a mystery unraveling right before your eyes. I got hooked, fast. It was like he was explaining all the crazy I'd lived through, but with fancy terms and theories. And then there was Sarah. Met her in that psych class. She was this quiet girl, always scribbling notes like she was going to be quizzed on life itself. We got partnered up for a project, and I guess you could say we clicked. She had this way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. We started hanging out after class, sometimes grabbing that cheap coffee or hitting the library together. I was still working a couple of jobs, campus bookstore during the day, a local diner at nights. Sleep was like this luxury I couldn't afford, but I was managing. The hustle was real, but so was the motivation. I was determined not to screw this up, not just for me, but for Mr. Thompson, for Mark, and maybe a little bit for Sarah, who somehow saw something in me. My grades were holding up, better than I'd expected. Turned out, college was a lot about just showing up, doing the work, and staying out of drama. A simple formula, but man, it worked. Halfway through the semester, I'm sitting with a solid B average, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, I could pull this whole college thing off. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Money was tight, really tight. There were nights I'd find myself counting out change just to make sure I could eat the next day. I remember one night, right before midterms, I had exactly $4 to my name. Bought a cup of noodles and a used textbook, dinner and a study guide all wrapped up in one. Sarah noticed, of course. She started dragging me to every campus event with free food she could find. "It's about resourcefulness," she'd say, dragging me to another lecture or meetup. I didn't mind. It was food, and it was with her. We'd sit there listening to some guest speaker, munching on whatever snacks were on offer, and it felt like being part of something normal, something right. As the end of the semester approached, I started feeling the pressure. Finals were looming and my funding was running on fumes. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, studied between orders, and lived off coffee and adrenaline. It was exhausting, but quitting wasn't an option. Then, one rainy night, everything nearly fell apart. I was biking back from the diner, dead tired, when a car came out of nowhere. Swerved to miss it and ended up eating pavement. Broke my wrist, trashed my bike, and there I was, lying in the rain wondering how I'd even finish the semester with a cast up to my elbow. So I had to go back to my mom's house, and that was a big mistake. She eventually told me that I would always have a place to live until I finished my collage. My first 2 semesters at a 2-year college, I maintained a 3.7 GPA. My teachers loved me, and it was my escape. Towards the end of my second semester during finals, I came home late one night around 10 p.m., and my mother yanked the door open, screaming in my face, asking when I'll move out. I'm slightly drunk and decide to ignore her and walk to my room completely. If I opened my mouth, that day would be the day I blew up and cast her out. I've rarely ever raised my voice at her because it never ended well. Now, at this point, I'm 19, and I've been doing school full-time with no savings. I get to my room. She rips my door open and starts yelling. I say nothing and stare at her. She walked away and called the police on me, saying she thought I'd murder her and my younger siblings. I don't know where the hell she got that idea from, and she's the one who's nearly killed me many times. I packed everything into a duffel bag and left 5 minutes afterwards. I failed all of my finals because I couldn't make it to my school. Things kind of spiraled, and the next 2 to 3 years were me on and off, homeless. I survived the best I could in a big city with no college degree, and made a lot of bad choices due to my bad habits. Eventually, I found a profitable hobby that gave me meaning. And through that, I started to work my way up. I got my own apartment, had a full-time job, and did my hobby on the side. I hadn't kept up contact with my mother at all, but my younger sister, who was old enough to have a phone, found me on social media. So I saw photos and such. She didn't have it anywhere near as bad as me, but she did get beaten occasionally. My mother reached out via email, all smiles, asking how I've been. I've always been envious of most people's relationship with their moms, so I gave her a chance and a call. We talked for a few minutes and everything was civil and seemed like things would go okay. But then she asked me what I've been up to the last few years, and I told her honestly that I had been homeless for a while and struggled a lot after what she did to me. But I worked my way out of it. She literally laughs. She laughed for a few seconds in a very condescending kind of chuckle and then said, I never did a thing to you, so you don't know what abuse is. It's your own damn fault you were homeless. So how about you? But by that point, I hung up. I was speechless and fuming. I don't know what abuse is. All right then. I've spent too damn long letting you destroy my sanity. Now is the time. There was a few things my mother didn't know. One, I knew for a fact that the current well-paying job she had was gone on lies, as she never got her college degree and lied about it on her resume. Two, I had access to all of her email accounts and cloud storage accounts since I was the one that set them up when I was younger, and she never changes her passwords. Lastly, she definitely wasn't aware that from 13 years old, and on to the last time she hit me, I took photos of all my bruises, marks, wounds, and bloody noses, saving them to my computer and then Google Drive. On top of that, my little sister had been sending me photos via social media of the bruises she got from my mom. The first thing I did was compile all of those photos and videos into one folder. I then reached out to CPS in my city and explained that my siblings were being abused, how I was abused in the past, and that I had mountains of proof. Since I've called the cops on my mother before, and the thing that happened with my older sister, there was immediately a home visit. They arrived almost a day later with the police, and coincidentally, my mother was literally in the process of beating my younger sister when they were knocking. Cue an emergency removal of all my siblings from the house and my mother getting arrested, though she was released hours later. I was getting a play-by-play of the events because my mother's best friend is a blabbermouth and everything my mother said, she told her son who related to me without either of their knowledge. I sent CPS all the evidence, and there's a legit case against my mother now. The next day I emailed and then called up her job to inform them that she had lied about having a very necessary college degree, as well as informed them of the current events in her life, which sparked a background check. She was fired days later by BI to a $75,000 salary and a blacklist, and the only industry you know how to work. I then spitefully deleted every cloud account and email address I ever made for her, which was all of them, which I'm sure will make keeping up with a lot of bills nearly impossible. I then anonymously reported her to the IRS because of the tax fraud she committed for years by claiming people's children that weren't hers, with a lot of detailed information, since I lived with her while she did it. So now my mother lost all her kids, and her job. I'm meeting with a caseworker from CPS next week to talk more about what happens moving forward, but I do know they're not going back. I don't know how she's going to pay her mortgage now and survive. I'm sure she's going to get a call from the IRS who will be looking for a few $1,000s she owes them. She also has to go back to court in a few months. Not exactly sure what she was charged with, but in the meantime, I swallowed my pride and moved into a homeless shelter in my city, specifically for people with jobs and savings. I'll be able to continue saving while I work on bettering myself as a person. I created an action plan and mapped out all my goals and how I want to achieve them. Up until recently, I wasn't even planning on being alive. Sorry if that's too dark. I honestly always had these thoughts wishing my mother would have finished the job with me and made life easier. But as of late, I'm becoming more and more curious about what I'm capable of if I give myself the chance. I've been able to visit my younger siblings and I've gotten to know my little sister a bit better because of the experience. I've also only drunk 3 times in the last 4 months compared to every other day in the past, which isn't great, but it's a change. My younger siblings are still with CPS, but I can't go into detail. My mother was supposed to go to a hearing to get them back, but things got complicated. My mother's best friend's son, who I've known for 8 years, does his best to relay all the crap my mother tells her while they talk on the phone all day. Things had gotten worse for her. She hasn't been keeping up with her mortgage payments. Her fiancé, my youngest sibling's dad, is no longer her fiancé anymore and is trying to file for custody. I heard she was a wreck and then went ghost, but it didn't make me feel better. There weren't supposed to be any winners. I initially just wanted to tell someone for once. But one thing changed my mind. Something I was not expecting. Months after I set this all in motion, a phone call from my mother in the past. Seeing her calls, even after moving out, would set me on edge. But that hasn't been the case lately. It was just another thing that happened, just another event. She always had my number but never reached out. Even when things first started going downhill, I doubt she even gave me a second thought. My mother is gone a few weeks after I set my plan into motion. The state I'm in brought felony charges up against her. She left the country shortly after and went to her home country in South America. I have no idea how she was even allowed to leave. But they didn't take her passport. She avoided specifics on that part. She mentioned staying with a family friend temporarily and tried to frame it as a short vacation. She didn't even start off with a hello. She started the conversation by ordering me to go somewhere quiet, before launching into a sob story about how things have been going for her. This is after months of no contact. after laughing at me for being homeless and denying she ever abused me months ago, just yammering away like it was nothing. But I let her talk. It was surreal. I felt so cold just listening to her talk. It was like talking to a stranger. She mentions losing out on so much money and how she doesn't know how it all happened. And then finally, she brings up the topic of me and my siblings. She brought up my little sister and the night of the emergency removal. She starts complaining about how she misses my little sister and brothers. She says that it's going to mess up tax season. And then she had the audacity to start trying to convince me that I should go talk to the caseworkers for her to back up her claim that she never abused them or me. And I should know that she said that to me after everything of all people. 9 minutes into the conversation, and like nothing ever happened. But it wasn't anything new. Of course, I cut her off, but at that point, my mind was already made up. I asked her if she remembered when I used to make iced tea for her all those years. She was a little thrown off, but said yes. I paused for a few seconds before slowly telling her in detail about all the ways I sabotaged her Lipton iced tea. She tried to interrupt me once, but I didn't stop talking. I told her about how I'd always put too much sugar and she'd never taste it and keep drinking more, which was why I always insisted there was just silence on the phone. But I know she was listening. I told her to wait until after dinner when I got home from school to shower so I could rub her spoons between my butt cheeks for maximum damage, and how I'd mix it into her food to mask it. At this point, I'm not even sure she's listening anymore, but I'm still describing specific days. I remember doing it that I know she would remember. She finally loudly interrupts me, screaming at me disgusting evil things. She cursed me the way she used to back in the days when she was standing over me with an extension cord, beating the skin off of me when I was younger. She's blaming me for ruining her life and how she wishes she had a better child, all without knowing that I directly caused the destruction of her current life. Though she's speaking about the past, I just let her waste her breath. She couldn't touch me or my siblings. It only lasted a few seconds. Now I remember spending years daydreaming. Of all things, I'd say to my mother if I had the chance. But I just bottled it up with all my other baggage and kept trying to exist. When she finally shut her mouth, I calmly told her, "Look, Mom, you don't know what abuse is. And honestly, it's your own damn fault. This is all happening to you. Also, my bad for pissing in your iced tea." Then I just hung up the phone and blocked her number. That was the last day I drank. I haven't talked to her since. I'm not sure she's aware. Or maybe she is. How bad of an idea it was to leave the country with all this going down, even if it was for a few weeks. At this point, I'm done with her. I don't want an apology. I just want to move forward and be a better person. I know that's hard to believe after everything I just told you, but it's the truth. I try my best to put as much positivity into the world and share it with the people around me as much as possible. But screw her. I don't know if she knows it was me, but I didn't tell her. I'm sure she can guess, though, if she really tried. Anyways, that's my revenge. It's still actively screwing her life up, but I'm not taking any active part in it. I wish it weren't like this. I wish I had a real family that loved me, and I knew how to love back the right way. I wish I had a real relationship with my mother, and none of those things happened. I wish I could have turned out like one of the happy people in the world, but I can spend all day wishing. But none of it could change. So I have to accept what happened and go on with my life.